So it's definitely not a medically recognised term. I think what we really need to understand is there's a word called homeostasis, and our bodies are very, very good at shifting, fine-tuning, always in flux, making little adjustments to keep us in balance. You could call it balance, to keep us in a stable state. So that's when it comes to our body temperature, pH, our hydration status, as well as our hormones. So in a healthy individual, all these little changes are happening. So our body gives us feedback through nerves, through sensors, through hormones, which are like little chemical messengers that travel around the body. And we stay in homeostasis. But when there's a disease state that affects our hormones, that's when you might end up with not enough of a particular hormone, too much of it, or a hormone that's not functioning the way it should. So medically, we're more likely to talk about suppressing hormones or replacing hormones or addressing the issue. Whilst it is a marketing term, a wellness term, hormone balancing isn't really a thing.
So our hormones probably don't need balancing, or it's a case of understanding if they're out of balance, how to treat that?
Yes, so if there's too much of a hormone, not enough, or it's not working properly, we need to understand the reason why. What we can do is there's certain ways we can support our body and be healthy to help support this process of homeostasis and optimize it.
I wonder, do you think this trend, especially as we see it on social media, do you think it's potentially taking advantage of our insecurities a little bit, perhaps stoking health anxiety a little bit?
I think so. I think, it's a great marketing ploy, and often we see there's so many now, aren't there, these sort of marketing terms out there that if they have a supplement and they stick on it, will balance your hormones to give you energy. Well, which hormones? There's so many different ones. How is it going to balance them? How is it going to give you energy? And, if you've got low energy levels, it could be linked to many of your different hormones, or it could not be. So yes. So I think it's one of those things we just need to be wary of and just consider before we spend our money.
And in terms of that idea of this holy grail of what balance is, there's no such thing as, Dr. Zoe said, it's this very intricate dance that hormones do, and we are living, breathing things that are agile and they shift throughout our lifetime. And the idea that this one particular powder or this one thing is going to balance your hormones, as you say, which one? And actually what it's about is supporting the environment that your hormones are living in the best they can, so they can all individually and together optimally function, and they can do their job properly. And that's what we're after. So it's actually not necessarily the hormones themselves we're balancing, it's the environment that they're living in through, insulin sensitivity, inflammation, all these things. And I think the idea that we can balance them and that being peddled online, it's just one part of this picture which isn't actually correct, and it's very confusing. And then you've got people doing lots of things which might not be the most optimal thing. They could be restricting certain food groups, indulging on certain supplements, but they're not actually getting anywhere. They'd be best putting their money on just buying a bit more fruit and veg and going outside for a walk and having a good time with their friends. And I think it definitely is driving a massive amount of anxiety. And also the idea of metrics as well, and using more metrics, measuring sleep, measuring glucose. And actually for a healthy individual, is that actually driving more anxiety? Do we actually need this data day in, day out? And it's
Dr. Zoe looks at her Garmin and realises that her sleep last night was shocking.
Yeah.
Freaks out.
But it's have you had a good night's sleep? Well, check in with how you're feeling. You don't necessarily, and so I think we're moving that direction even more with finding out what's going on and the sort of metric side of things. That's also driving anxiety.
Do you think it's leading people to self-diagnose a little bit as well? Because I wonder whether lots of women that don't necessarily have an endocrine disorder might think that they do, because they're observing probably quite normal shifts if they're looking at the Garmin or the Whoop, perhaps thinking, oh, this function in my body's been explained to me by this company.
Yeah.
but they've explained it as though it's something I should be concerned about or tracking, when actually it's just a normal function.
Well, that's right. Everything's meant to fluctuate. So we'll have different levels of certain hormones in the morning to what we do at night and throughout our menstrual cycle. And even from moment to moment, depending upon what we're doing, how we're feeling, if we're exercising, what we've eaten. And that's absolutely normal. In fact, some of those fluctuations, we would not be able to function without them. Like we get a cortisol burst in the morning, which wakes us up and gives us motivation and gets us going. We have a melatonin peak in the evening, which helps us sleep. So this idea of sort of regulating and leveling off and balancing and all these words actually don't really make sense anyway when it comes to endocrinology.
And the marketing, it's a bit like a horoscope, when you read it and you're like, that applies to me. And it's like tired, anxious, and like, it must be this. And it's playing on those, vulnerabilities. And for a lot of women, we are tired. Our energy is on the floor, but it's when it moves over into a sort of different one where your quality of life is really being impacted. And that's when you need to really seek help. Go to your GP, get some blood tests done, and working with qualified health practitioners to actually understand what's going on. But marketing is very, very clever. It's that sort of halo effect,
and it is tricky. I think even for those of us in the know. To know where is that boundary where, okay, I'm feeling a bit tired, I can try some things myself, maybe I should try this supplement or eating a bit better or moving a bit more or getting to bed a bit earlier. But at what point does that become, I need some help here because this is pathological, this is potentially a disease state? And that's the really tricky bit, I guess, to understand where that line. I would say as a GP, if in doubt, we would rather see you sooner rather than later, because it might be that we can reassure you. It might be that we can just do a couple of tests to rule a few things out, because sometimes endocrine disorders can have very subtle signs and symptoms, such as, an underactive thyroid. For years and years, people might be having very low grade symptoms. But if you speak to a GP and you're given this list and we recognise this pattern of these symptoms, we might trigger in our thought, okay, let's just check your thyroid function. And if you are underactive or overactive, which can often have a lot of overlapping symptoms, that's something that's really important. It is treated and treated properly.
Yeah, and sort of low vitamin D status, low iron status. And so people can be, in one hand, you have a lot of people living with something that they think is a normal when it's not. If in doubt, go and seek help. Yeah.
How much should we know? What are the basics?
Yeah.
Is there something that kind of gives us a sense of what's normal and what's not? I guess these things are really hard to tap into because not only are we all different, but there are gaps in our knowledge, aren't there? Certainly when I was at school, I don't really think we got Hormones 101. Our sex education wasn't that great.
I don't think it is. And it's not. It's not
No,
now.
it's not better now.
And the same. I've got young girls who come to my clinic. Sort of, I specialise in polycystic ovarian syndrome, and the lack of education with hormonal health and all of those things. It's still a problem. I mean, I didn't even really know what the word hormone was when we were at school. And the word anxiety didn't exist. It was a different time. But I think the problem's still there. And that's why knowledge and having conversations like this, it's just so important.
Look, fast forward to medical school and, maybe it's changed. It was quite a while since I was there. But even there, even in medical school, even in GP training, when it comes to especially the women's health stuff, how much should we know? Well, I think it depends on the person. People just need to be aware that just about any symptom that you're having could potentially be linked to your hormones.
Yeah.
And just bear that at the back of your mind. Yeah. And if you're not feeling well or something's not going right or you've got an issue and you're going to see your doctor, maybe just ask the question, could this be my hormones? Always have that in your locker. Just always question, could it be your hormones? Because your doctor or your nurse actually might not think about it unless you say it.
Yeah, and I think your body is constantly talking to you. It's always giving you signs and clues and things. So tuning in and really listening. And that's the issue with the whole metric thing. Have I had a glucose spike? And also glucose spikes are quite a normal thing. Yep. It's part of human design. Otherwise, insulin wouldn't exist. But it's the more I think we can tune in and listen more to our bodies. It's just going to be beneficial, not relying on, metrics to do that or think, I've got too much to do, because preventative medicine and nutrition and all of those things is brilliant. And you don't want to go so far down the line where it's impacting your quality of life even more. So really tuning in and listening to those symptoms and what they could be.
Presumably that's why you wrote a book about this, to let us all know the basics and what we should be learning about.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the book and what it contains, because I wish I'd had this when I was at school, moving through my teenage years. It's really, really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a guide to transform your health with the sort of power of your hormones. And I talk about them like a superpower because it's, well, part memoir. I have my own issues with endometriosis and PCOS. It's part roadmap, but it's also a bit of a love letter to hormones because they get a really bad rap and we're always blaming them and there's such negative connotations. And I go about it in the book, but it's women, how we've kind of been conditioned throughout history to sort of demonize hormones and hysteria and all of that stuff. So actually, you meet all of the hormones kind of like characters, like in a play, each one, what they do, how they function, and how incredible they are, because when they work optimally, it's just so fascinating. And so it's understanding them and then actually understanding how they might sort of malfunction. So what are the things that could be driving them to not optimally work, whether that's the production, the transportation, the reception. So can they sort of deliver their messages, or the detoxification? So I go through all the things that could be driving it. And that could be underpinned just by natural shifts, puberty, pregnancy, menopause, things that we don't, want to stop and can't stop. So it could be a combination of all of those things. So it's what can drive them to sort of misbehave. And then my sort of 6-step plan of how to create an optimal environment for them to thrive. And at the core, insulin sensitivity, inflammation, sort of cortisol, stress, along with nutrients, sleep, movement, positivity, creativity. And it's never just one thing. It's not just about the food we eat. It's about all of these other things coming together. And if we create the right environment, we can turn the volume button down on certain symptoms and just let your hormones do their thing, which they can do so brilliantly. So it's very much about shedding that idea about wellness perfection.
Maybe you can help us with this one, Dr. Zoe. What are some of the telltale signs that things might not be quite right, that your hormones might be out of whack? Because there are probably quite a few symptoms, right?
I mean, it depends on the hormone that's out of whack. And I would say just about any symptom potentially could be. So, I mean, I guess if we think about, if we think about, let's think about thyroid hormone, it can be underactive, it can be overactive. So you could have tiredness, you could have dry skin, you could have hyperactivity, you could feel hot all the time, cold all the time. There are certain, you could have a lump in your neck, a goiter, because your thyroid gland is actually growing to try and produce more. You could have eye symptoms where your eyes look like they're protruding. So, that's just one hormone. I'm giving you a whole list, and that's not even half of the list. If it's your sex hormones, so if you're a woman and it's your estrogen and progesterone, like estrogen, I don't know what your characters are because I haven't read your book yet, but you've just kindly given me one and I can't wait. But I always talk about estrogens like superwoman.
I love that. I call it the life hormone, but I love superwoman.
Superwoman, it makes you feel strong, powerful. When your estrogen's high in your menstrual cycle, they've shown that you actually even walk with more swagger. You're more attractive to the other sex. So if your estrogen levels are low, think menopause when they're declining, you lose the superpower. Whereas progesterone, on the other hand, is a very calming. You're chilled out. You're like super chill, and it can help, help promote sleep. And so you can imagine that as that's declining, as you're sort of approaching menopause, that can make you feel the opposite. And that's why we get some people really struggle just before their period, because in that period of time, both are declining at the same time. So you're losing the superpower and the chill. So you can have, over 50 different symptoms. So again, that's 2 hormones that can give you all those symptoms.
In your cycle, the most hormonal you are is when you feel your best. So actually,
when people say, people say, oh, look, she's hormonal. Actually,
it's when they're on the floor.
It's the opposite. So then thinking about cortisol. Yeah. So you can have too much cortisol, Cushing's syndrome, you can have not enough, you can have Addison's. The list is endless. So I think it's really difficult to say what symptom could be caused by your hormone without talking about a particular hormone and then listing the symptoms.
I guess
So it's just about anything. Being hormone aware. And I think but how much is too much? I mean, I think for people who are interested, for people who are willing to make adaptations to their life, or for people who've ever had any disorders linked to their hormones, reading Hannah's book is a great thing to do. But when I think about my typical patient, they wouldn't read that book. They wouldn't want that amount of knowledge. So what knowledge, it's really tricky because most doctors out there don't know all the information that's in your book. So what do people need to know? And it's such a big, complicated subject. You know, I'm a GP, but I don't know all of it. I'm not an endocrinologist. And I probably know quite a bit more than some other GPs because I've taken the effort, because I talk, you know, in the public. I've made sure that I'm as up to date as I possibly can be. So it's such a huge subject.
And, you know, there's over 50 in the body, but there's a little VIP list, and it's sort of just knowing, you know, your sex hormones, your stress hormone.
I think insulin's obviously the very important one.
Serotonin, melatonin, oxytocin. And so this little VIP list, I sort of talk about it in the book, like it's a bit of a need to know basis. And otherwise, it's so overwhelming and it's so vast, and there's so much we don't know.
Growth hormone, leptin, ghrelin,
prolactin, you know, GLP-1, which has obviously got a lot more press recently.
People are getting so into longevity now as well, aren't they? They're getting the full panel checked and freaking out, thinking something's low, and it's something they've never heard of before. And actually, it is probably driving a little bit of anxiety where perhaps there needn't have been, because they didn't think about that.
It depends on the time of day. For example, I was saying earlier, certain, you know, if we're assessing somebody's cortisol level, you have to do it at a specific time of day.
Or do you do sort of like we do the cortisol awakening response? You have this because cortisol gets such a bad rap, but
but we need it.
It's such a motivator. It's, you know, we know that's why that idea of sleep on it, see how you feel in the morning. And in the morning, when it peaks about 30 to sort of 40 minutes after waking up, and it's the pattern of the cortisol awakening response, and it peaks to take you from a state of sleep to alert, it's when you are, everything's running optimally, you're most motivated, best time to do a to-do list, you're feeling on top of your game, and then it starts to sort of roll down, it sort of has a changing of the guards in the evening, and we have that surge of melatonin. But it's amazing, and it gets such a bad rap. But if you're looking at your cortisol levels, you map them out throughout the day with a saliva test, and that's where you get a true picture of, is it blunted? Is it following the right pattern? So just doing it is like throwing a dart. If you were looking at estrogen or progesterone, where are you in your cycle? And I think sometimes, you know, functional testing is incredible. I do a lot of it in clinic, but sometimes if people are going out and buying tests online and they don't have a practitioner explaining the data, it can be really overwhelming. And it's that idea of just too much information, you know. I think.
And they all interact with each other. And, you know, you can test somebody's thyroid level and it could be normal, but that doesn't mean actually their thyroid function is normal. It's very, very complicated.
Yeah, normal but not optimal is something we hear a lot.
Tuning in and actually just seeing how you feel first is really, really important.
And doing the things you can, which we're going to get on, I'm sure, and talk about, to give your body the best chance of achieving homeostasis without any intervention.
Well, let's talk a bit more about that. So do you have tips on what are the best ways for someone who is really looking to optimise their hormones? You know, what should they be doing?
Well, I mean, I'll leave nutrition to Hannah, seeing as that's your topic. I guess it's the pillars of lifestyle medicine. It's all of them. So if we think about sleep, our hormones are important in helping us get to sleep. We've mentioned melatonin. But also if our sleep is poor, that can affect a whole collection of different hormones and how they function. It can affect our hunger hormones and make us more likely to overeat or crave certain foods. It can affect our sex hormones, so it can impact our levels of fertility or even feeding to other hormonal issues. It can affect our cortisol. So we might find that our cortisol is less able to behave appropriately in response to stress, or we might have this sort of grumbling higher level cortisol throughout the day than what is healthy for us, and that causes inflammation and other problems. It's not just about the amount of sleep, it's the different types of sleep as well. So when we go through deep, slow wave sleep, that's when we release more growth hormone that helps our bodies repair, helps us build muscle, which is really, really important. So there's sleep, exercise, which is always my hero topic, nutrition, exercise. When you exercise, when you do a workout, you pretty much immediately get this feel-good feeling because there's this amazing cocktail of chemicals that get released in your brain. So you get serotonin, which is the happy hormone, you get dopamine, the reward, you get oxytocin, the love hormone, you get noradrenaline, which helps you feel like super focused and more motivated. But also sort of longer term with exercise, you get better insulin sensitivity. Again, growth hormone helping you build muscle. It helps regulate your appetite. So exercise is really important. And then the thing is, they all have a knock-on effect with each other as well. If you're exercising regularly, you're likely to sleep better. And I made a decision last year that I wasn't going to stress anymore. I mean, I do, but I had a little thing that happened with my heart. My heart went into an abnormal rhythm. I now know that there wasn't a cause for it. It was just a purely chance thing. But at the time, before I knew that, I gave up alcohol, I gave up caffeine, and I gave up stress. And I just thought, it's just not worth it. So whilst I can't stop there being stress in my life, and there's a lot of very stressful things happening in the world right now, what I can do is take the active decision to not allow that stress, that psychological stress, to cause too much stress in my body. So I can break that cycle. So things like mindfulness, even just taking like literally 30 seconds to stop and be in the moment. So the way I do it is I activate my senses. I'm like, what can I start at my feet? I can feel my feet in my shoes. I can feel my heart beating. I can hear like the hum in the background. I can see that bright light. I can see. So I just go into my senses for 30 seconds and it just takes you out of that fight or flight back into the parasympathetic. So whilst we can't eliminate stress from our life, we can stop that stress causing the stress response in the body. So the breath is probably the quickest way to bring yourself out of that sympathetic into the parasympathetic. But other things, light exposure in the morning. People are raving about that at the moment, aren't they?
Well,
but it
the full
helps
spectrum
with
of light in the
circadian
morning.
rhythm.
Yeah.
And then toxins, Let's talk about alcohol. I shared with you earlier. I had a few glasses last night.
I'm going to be having a few tonight.
It's your anniversary. It's a toxin. It's not good for us. It's not good for our hormones. But also there are social benefits to alcohol. So for me last night, I was meeting some of the mums from the school that my son's going to go to. So for me, I think the net benefit, despite me feeling a bit not so sharp today, there was a net benefit, but there are a lot of toxins that we have choice over, but there are a lot of toxins, and I know this is something you like to talk about, sort of environmental toxins that have been introduced into our world over the past few decades that we don't have much control over.
It's a huge trend, isn't it, at the moment on social media, low tox living, the idea that if we can remove some of those toxins, we might be able to stabilise our hormones a bit better, feel a bit healthier, feel less sluggish. I mean, you're the expert on this.
Yeah,
Hannah.
I kind of have the 4 Ps. So it's sort of pesticides, plastics, products, but also people, because people can be really toxic too.
I love that one.
And actually some people are really like, the energy vampires.
Yeah.
So it's kind of protecting yourself. And the thing is it's not just one particular thing, but we know from research, when we talk about endocrine disruptors, these are chemicals that can mimic or block hormones, and they can be found in certain plastics, and microplastics are well and truly part of us now. We're seeing them for the first time in organs, placentas, human hearts. And so trying to reduce plastic exposure, washing your veg, doing all the things you can with, if there's products in the home, making better choices. You can't do everything. I've still got, I've got young children. I still have bleach in my house. But it's actually the sort of make best choices where you can. So, for example, using, glass to store your food, to use a stainless steel water bottle, really look at your products, look what's in them, do the best you can. That being said, I'm not giving up my Diptyque perfume or my Dior mascara. And so you've got to give and take and sort of fight your battles where you can make good choices and reduce, don't use cling film, use other, there's lots of different things you can do and protect your own energy. As I say, people, like the stress that some people can cause you.
Well, it's catching, isn't it? Sometimes you can enter like on the tube, for example, everyone's really wound up and they just want to shove and have a go at each other, and you think, oh, I've stepped into an energy situation that I do not want to be in right now.
Yeah,
I was quite calm before.
Yeah, it's like setting boundaries. You know, all of that sort of taking plastic out of your home, it's as important to set boundaries. Say no to stuff. If you can't be everything to everyone all the time. And that can, of course, have an impact on your hormones. I think there's a fixation that it's just products, it's just diet, it's just, those typical toxins.
We think of the physical things, don't we?
Yeah,
that
but
go
it's
into
actually
our
energetically.
Body, but energy. There's a really good book, actually, book recommendation, Energy Rules.
Oh, nice.
And it's like, I think Energy Vampires is one of the chapters.
Yeah, right.
In it, but it's how to protect and look after your own energy and protect yourself, because you can't always avoid energy vampires.
Exactly.
But you can have strategies to protect yourself.
And that's why I think these conversations are really important. We've covered so many great tips, and I'll talk a little bit about nutrition, but it's never just one thing. It's this perfect storm that comes together. Just like a perfect storm can come together, genetics plays a huge role with hormones. We know with conditions like PCOS, it's more typical in family clusters. You either get dealt a hand or you don't. But then environmental, it's sort of a coming together of all those things. And nutrient deficiencies, your gut microbiome, your circadian rhythm, your insulin sensitivity, sort of inflammation, stress play a massive role. But it's so many things. And so when it comes to diet, really nice, simple things. First things first, regulate your blood sugar. Insulin resistance is one of the biggest driving forces of endocrine disorders. It really impacts the mechanism, the transportation system for your hormones, your sex hormone binding globulins. And when they're low, it's like, imagine buses going down Oxford Street. When they're low, it's all these hormones waiting to hop on. It's like this tube strike. It's a backlog, and we can get excess testosterone. And that's why it's such a big mechanism with PCOS. So when we talk about working on your insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance is when you've kind of just built up a tolerance to insulin, which is an amazing hormone. But when we build up a tolerance, we need more and more of it for it to sort of get its job done. So if we can try and keep your blood sugar regulated, so having low glycemic index foods, always ask yourself the question, where is the protein when I eat? And trying to keep your blood sugar steady. It's where I start with nearly every single client.
And fibre as well.
And fibre. And really so talking, and fibre from a gut perspective. The gut plays a huge, we're understanding more of it, but particularly estrogen and something called the estrobolome. It's like a constellation of bacteria that are really involved with the metabolism of estrogen. It is so important we feed that good gut bacteria. And so actually, fibre should kind of be its own macronutrient. It's so important. Beans, legumes, roughage, beautiful colours. So I have sort of the pillars of the book: balance your blood sugar. And then the next is eat colourful. And that's all about fibrous. And it's also food. It's about falling back in love with food again. I grew up in, the late 90s, early noughties. It tried to take two things away from me: my eyebrows and my love of food. I was unfortunately, the one thing I got back was my love of food. My eyebrows have never grown back. But it was the fashion then. But the diet industry and my obsession was sort of just about, can I shrink myself? It was so hard with PCOS, and actually, it was like, how little could I eat in a day to get through, and all those things. And diet culture of, it's not to do with calories either. It's useful in some scenarios, but it's the colour, the nutrients, having fun with food again. It's the very journey that can help your body function better, and the functionality of vitamins and minerals. It's like a relay race in the body. We have all these pathways, and the nutrients and cofactors, they like hand the baton to the next person and the next person. And even something as simple as vitamin D status is so involved in the pathogenesis of PCOS. And so eating colourful for all the lovely nutrients, phytoestrogens, antioxidants, and then eating smart strategically to support the gut, the liver, which is really, really important, and those mechanisms that are really involved, because the liver, which is like the body's laboratory when it comes to hormones, when sort of we detoxify hormones, if that's not working optimally, it can be a big driver where we see excess hormones. And so eating smart in that way. So eating smart, eating colourful, balancing your blood sugar, beautiful ways. And it doesn't have to be complicated. But eating breakfast for a woman is really, really important. So as opposed to wake up, fast, coffee, maybe do a workout, then breakfast, wake up, breakfast, then have your coffee, and then work out, if that's sort of the order. Because we want to keep, we don't want to stress the body out in the morning and take away that fuel. And we want to, how we set ourselves up in the day in terms of blood sugar regulation can then really impact decisions we make later in the day, more sweet cravings and things like that. So that's why with clients, I often start with just breakfast for even, 3 weeks that we work on. So you don't have to do everything all at once either. Take your time and start with breakfast and weave lots of lovely things in.
I really love that I'm hearing this more and more now, this narrative of, often when I explain it to people for decades, women say, I shouldn't have this, I shouldn't have that, I shouldn't have this. 2, my body deserves, my body needs, my body should have. And it's focusing first on the things that we want to put into our body. But also having a little bit of what we love and enjoy. Yeah. And actually, if you put all the fibre and fruit and veg and like healthy fats and proteins in, you don't leave that much. But you probably don't want to eat all that much of the stuff that you really, really love. You can eat more in...
Where we do see sort of overindulgences, say, ultra-processed food and sweet cravings, so much is placed the blame on willpower. But it's not your body. Is that one of the cleverest thing on this human planet, and it's not interested in in you getting into your summer outfits. It's literally interested in your survival. Your body is hardwired to survive, and so if we're on a roller coaster ride of too many blood glucose spikes, your body, when it dips, your brain will go and make you find some. And so that idea of, I have a phrase of any diet that's ever made you feel like you're a failure has failed you. And that idea of restriction and all those things, it's shifting where we have so much more positivity around food. But it's not about being perfect. I still drink wine, eat pizza, and it's part of, breaking bread and the joy that food brings is a really important factor. It brings people together, which makes you feel happy, which boosts oxytocin, which can lower cortisol. And then, so it's a little bit of everything. We have to sprinkle realism and shifting away from perfection, because that does not exist at all.
It's great to know, though, that food is something that is easy to come by, easy to prepare, easy to consume, and it can help you. It can put you in a state where your hormones are happier, which is great. But I did want to ask you about supplements, because I have so many bottles with hormone balancing under my desk. And a lot of these contain specific ingredients like Myo-Inositol and Berberine and things like that. And for the average person, you might think, oh, well, I can't possibly get that from my diet because I've never heard of it before. But can it be found in food? Do we need to be taking these supplements? Can they help? As a nutritionist, is that something that you'd recommend, or is it really dependent on the person?
Well, always food first. And think of so at the end of the day, if we think of nutritional therapy, it's taking nutrients at a therapeutic dose for a positive outcome. And in some instances, there could be a bodily system which is under stress and it needs a helping hand. With berberine and myo-inositol, that's very much to do with the mechanism of insulin sensitivity. In the same way, metformin from a medical perspective can be really helpful. They're not rivals. They all work on slightly different things. Myo-Inositol is, if we think of insulin like a lock and a key, it's a bit like putting oil on the lock and a key, but it's a sugar, so you can't sort of find it in the diet, but it's really well tolerated. You just put it into water. I still take it because I have PCOS, and very well tolerated, not really many side effects. Metformin can be really brilliant. It works on a slightly different mechanism. It sort of works on the liver sort of reining in glucose a little bit, but it can have a few more side effects, but they can work as a team. I have clients who are on both, but when it comes to berberine, that is a plant compound. Originally in Chinese medicine, it was for gut work. So it's like an antimicrobial, but it's really good for blood sugar balance. And it can stimulate and sort of turn the volume up of GLP-1 a little bit in the gut. So if we had an individual who had a sort of insulin resistance driven hormonal disorder, absolutely Berberine and Myo-Inositol could be a really lovely adjunction to diet and all the other stuff to help create an environment where we turn the volume button down on symptoms. But if you had a hormonal issue which had nothing to do with insulin resistance, there's not much point in you taking it. So you have to know the root cause of what you're working with, and just hormone balancing.
Buying some gummies on the internet, probably not.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing
is,
supplements are very useful in clinic, but you don't want to be rattling around with 1,000 different things, and often it's short. So you're on supplements for a short time, and then you sort of end up going down just to potentially a good vitamin D, a good multivitamin. But if you're looking at really good supplements that can be useful, it's if that person's deficient. Putting vitamin D on top of someone who's got vitamin D is no point. And although it's quite hard to get toxic levels of vitamin D, it is a fat-soluble vitamin D, so you can. So where's the starting line? It's about topping up. So think of it like an overdraft at a bank. If you're in the red, that's when it's going to be really helpful. But if you're all swimming and you've got some savings, you don't need to. And then you could end up having this really expensive wee.
I was about to say, we're just flushing it all out.
They're not cheap, but, there is a place for them. I use them in clinic, and probiotics are brilliant. But, there are billions, trillions of different strains. And so if you just willy-nilly take a probiotic, what strain are you taking? Are we working on helping the vaginal microbiome? Are we working on what strains? Because they're like seeds you plant into the gut, and then we want that sort of particular bacteria to multiply. But they all have different, one might be completely irrelevant to actually what we're trying to do. I have clients who come and be like, I'm on this brand, which is quite expensive. And I was like, well, actually, if you look at the ingredients, there's no research to back up that they would be particularly good for endometriosis. They're not going to really do any harm, but these are the strains, for example. So you've got to really look at the intricacies. And there's a lot of, like we've said before, like the marketing side of things, the holy grail of this powder will balance your hormones. I mean, that's just not true.
Yeah, and we're living in a world of fake reviews now as well. We used to think that consumer reviews were the way to tell, but now a lot of them are not real. So
because with supplements, they only have to follow the laws of the Food Standards Agency. So, you can get really shoddy. I mean, there was one in the news just this week.
Oh yes, with the melatonin in the kiddie one.
Which was a kiddie's magnesium supplement that actually contained melatonin.
Like twice the dose of which would be regulated for an adult or something crazy.
Was it? Yeah. So I think you do have to be careful. And I have had a patient with vitamin D toxicity because they were taking it's doable. I mean, you need to take, I believe, 10 times. So the government recommends that we take 10 micrograms per day in the UK, because in the winter months the sun doesn't get high enough in the sky for us to make enough. But it's easy. It can happen that if you're taking a vitamin, extra strength vitamin D supplement, and you're taking a cod liver oil that's got vitamin D, and a multi that's got vitamin D, and you're taking a menopause supplement that they've added vitamin D into, and then you take something for hair and nails and they've added that, it can happen that you can end up taking toxic doses. I take 4 supplements, and people say, what do you take? I'm like, well, I take vitamin D, I take a multivitamin, because why not? It's cheap, it's very, very cheap, and on some days, it won't do me any harm. And the other 2 are absolutely none of your business, because they're for me because of my needs and my wants and my dietary routine, etc. So it's actually completely irrelevant to you.
I worry about toxicity a little bit, because obviously part of my job is testing all of the supplements. So I have to be really, really careful, and I have to check in with GPs and nutritionists to make sure that I am being healthy, taking, the highest grade, that I'm not doubling up too much, that I'm not paying for expensive wee, and just making sure that...
like I call it the Frankenstein supplement plan, and it's sort of a hodgepodge dolly mix of all these different things, and you're like, right, okay, we're stripping it back, because it's and also a lot of medications can be, contraindicated, people on blood thinners can't take omega-3. It's like the Wild West. And the thing is, all of this stuff, it's coming from a good place, and people are taking supplements, and it's because they're wanting the best outcome for their health. And unfortunately, without the knowledge of knowing how things might interact, if they're contraindicated, or there's going to be a toxicity level if you're adding that onto that, it's really hard to navigate. People don't teach you this stuff. So it's so easily done. There's so much stuff you can do with food. And even, a really great way of looking at a therapeutic dose of things is herbal tea. You know, green tea is one of the best things you can drink for lowering testosterone and things like PCOS, for actually really working on regulating cortisol. It's got L-theanine in it. It delivers caffeine in a very different way to coffee. And 3 cups a day is the equivalent of like a therapeutic dose.
So good news for those obsessed with their matcha at the moment.
Yeah, love a matcha. Like, and it's really, you know, matcha is having its moment. It looks pretty, but then if you're putting it in like a strawberry vanilla latte,
maybe not as
like,
effective. Yeah.
And going back to that living to 100, you know, the Japanese are up there in terms of how many centenarians they have.
Matcha, phytoestrogens, you know, they know what they're doing with the edamame beans. So good to have, you know, it's little things. Eggs, so good, you know, just, you know, good fish, vegetables, apples, you know, all these lovely things. It doesn't have to be over expensive. And for anyone who thinks that it's, you know, too expensive to eat healthily, you know, the freezer is your friend. Frozen berries, it's the biggest hack. Like, they go off so quickly and so easy to throw into things. And I chuck mine in the microwave in a mug. They defrost and I pour it over, you know, yogurt. Super easy.
Yeah, some of the recommendations I think, because, you know, we're meant to get 30 plant points a week now, aren't we? Which can feel really overwhelming to some people. But I often say it's about making, you know, if you do a weekly shop, if you switch out your kidney beans for mixed beans, you've gone from 1 to 5 species. If you switch out your cashew nuts for a bag of mixed nuts, you've gone from 1 to 5 different plant species. So it's making those simple swaps. You know, if you switch different tack, but your white rice to brown rice, if you're a family that eats rice several times a week, over the course of your life, these switches, which cost nothing, and once you've made a decision to change it, you just stick to it, over the course of your life make a big difference.
Yeah. Good tips for getting more in. I think that's
beans,
that's a good
beans,
takeaway.
beans, legumes.
Good for your heart. The more you eat, the more you
longer you live. But there's, you know, when we look at longitudinal studies and longevity, actually out sort of performing Mediterranean diets, high fiber diet.
It's less than 1 in 10 people, isn't it? Get the 30 grams a day that we need.
You know, seeded bread and good quality, you know, sourdough. Looking at, as I say, I'll harp it again, the beans and legumes, because it's a really cost-effective way of getting in really good carbohydrates, but they're also a source of protein. And so throwing them into salads.
And sprinkling seeds, because you've got really healthy fats in there on salads, porridge.
Are the win with a zinc.
If you've got children, if you're baking cakes, whatever, sprinkle some seeds into everything.
Yeah,
we just seeds all over everything.
And as we're sort of getting into soup season, seasonally,
soup season.
like a really good hack is the butter bean. So obviously we love a creamy soup, but if you get a soup that you're going to whiz, watercress or butternut squash, and you're whizzing it up, if you put butter beans, drain them, whiz them up, adds the creaminess, loveliness, texture, super creamy, and then you're just upping the fibre, phytoestrogens, protein, a bit of carb. So add beans to your soups, people.
Stunning. You're making me hungry.
One thing from today. Beans.
Hormones.
But they're cheap as well. I love that because they're so cheap as well that beans are great advice because it's accessible for everybody. But increase them gradually. Don't go from 0 to hero because you might get a bit uncomfortable.
So when it comes to anyone who finds it really tricky with beans, it's often if your gut isn't used to having them, a good trick if you're using dried like red lentils, soaking them overnight and giving them a really good wash, it sort of starts that digestion process a little bit. And so picking tinned or soaking overnight as opposed to dry that you're cooking right away, but go easy because
build it gradually, isn't it?
Build up gradually.
Don't go 0
those
to 10.
gut bugs might just go a bit crazy.
The next topic I want to ask you both about is this conversation about the pill, because it's obviously one of the most prescribed medications when it comes to hormones. It's given out, you know, quite freely to help people with hormonal imbalances, endocrine disorders, etc. But it's also the subject of huge debate at the moment because lots of people are deciding that they don't want to take it anymore. And that a lot of that is to do with wellness influencers, you know, funny marketing, lots of different people talking about ancestral diet and ancestral lifestyle, and we never used to take this and we never used to have hormonal problems. But I wonder what your view is on that, because obviously the pill has been incredible in terms of economic freedoms, giving women choice, giving women bodily autonomy. You know, this tiny little thing has had such a huge impact on us, and yet it is the centre of so many conversations about hormones.
I actually made a BBC documentary, a Horizon documentary about this very topic a few years ago. And for myself and the producers and the directors, our brief was very much, we want to take a really critical look at the pill. We want to rip it to pieces. We want to tear it apart. And we want to say at the end, this is why nobody should take the pill. And with that intention going into it, we couldn't do that. I mean, there are definitely some caveats. But, you look at all the meta-analyses, you look at all the studies, you look at everything that we researched. We went to different countries and, we even there are some studies that link the pill to suicide and they're all legit. But overall, the evaluation was that for the majority of women who choose to use the pill as a method of contraception or as a treatment for some certain conditions, it is safe and effective. The big caveat was that women should absolutely 100% know their range of options and make an informed choice. If it's the right choice for them, they should be very, very aware of any symptoms that they get, should absolutely keep a symptom diary, and should not feel that they should put up with or tolerate any symptoms that they get as a result of taking it, because there are lots of other options. And I think certainly with, diseases like PCOS and endometriosis as well, there's an additional knowledge that women need to have that, this isn't going to treat your condition. It's a great symptom reliever. And in endometriosis, alongside, say, for example, surgery, studies show it can reduce recurrence or reduce symptoms or even reduce severity of endometriosis after that. But on its own, it's not the panacea of treatment. It's that it shouldn't be called necessarily treatment of those conditions. It's treatment of the symptoms of those conditions. So there are lots of caveats, but of course as well, there's the increase in risk of breast cancer from taking the pill, which is negated by the decrease in risk of endometrial, ovarian and colorectal cancer. So overall, there's no increased risk of cancer. But if you're somebody who already has an increased risk for some other reason of breast cancer, then it's important to be aware. Increased risk of getting a blood clot, again, very small increased risk. But if you already have other risk factors, similarly with strokes and heart disease. So people need to have all of the information so that they can weigh up the risks and the benefits for them. And in the majority of cases, if women choose to take the contraceptive pill with the information, it's deemed safe and effective.
And it's one of those things as well where there is so much more information now than there was, right? I mean, there's a brilliant platform called The Lowdown where you can go and you can compare, one type of hormonal contraception with others. You can speak to a whole community of women who have shared their experiences, talked about their symptoms, talked about any side effects. So we never had that before. That's really, really useful.
Everybody has a right to have an opinion, and everybody has a right to share information. But to the people who are taking on board that information, you just have to be sensible in how you weight it. So, if you have a professor of gynecology who's talking about endometriosis, who's well respected and has done studies, and this has been his life, and he's giving advice, versus somebody who is, I don't know, a chef, but has had a bad experience and they're giving their advice, just, accordingly weight what you're taking on board, and don't think because this one person had a bad experience, that means that the pill should be banned.
We've got a lot of kind of anecdotal versus expert at the moment, haven't we, in the idea that experts are less trusted, especially in digital spaces like social media. And I think a lot of that does create a lot of fear in people because they think, oh, well, you had a bad experience, and therefore you saying this is poison, that must be true. We can't necessarily make those leaps, can we? Especially when it's our health on the line.
Well, statistics can be really scary as well. So when we made this documentary, there was a young girl who wanted to take the pill, but her mum had died of breast cancer. So she was scared, and she'd heard the statistic that taking the pill increases your risk of breast cancer by 20%, which is correct. And that sounds scary. So we went to visit a professor who does these studies, and he explained to her what that means in absolute terms is if you've got 100,000 women in this building between the ages of 15 and 39, and they don't take the pill, around 55 of them will get breast cancer in a year. If you then take 100,000 women and put them in this building and you give them all the pill, the same age group, then an additional 13 will get breast cancer. So even though 20% sounds like a lot, you've got 100,000 women and it's 13 more. So it's actually a small increased risk, which also, when you consider that it reduces your risk of 3 other types of cancer, so overall there's no net increase of cancer. For her, when the information was presented in that way, she felt much more confident to make that decision, and she did decide to go on the pill. But yeah, the media sometimes doesn't help, because at the end of the day, newspapers or online, they want to sell, they want people to read it. So the more scary they can make it sound, that's what they tend to do.
And I think there's been such a popularity versus expert, and that's what people are missing the trick, because actually popularity doesn't mean expertise. But I'm sure that people who aren't necessarily, say, qualified giving out advice, it's coming from a good place, one would hope. And for some young girls and women, they might feel lost, they might not have been heard or brushed off, and it's actually the only place they have to turn. So it's a complex topic, but you have to have your wits about you, and anecdotal, if it's worked for one person in an individual case, doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And particularly with the pill. And the thing is, with the pill and, say, PCOS, it can be so brilliant, particularly for young girls, it just taking the edge off the symptoms, but you need to do the work in terms of root cause through diet, lifestyle, nutrition. And because you're going to come off the pill at one point and all those symptoms will come back. In some cases, the volume button might be turned up because the pill can impact zinc, selenium, magnesium, the gut microbiome. So there was actually a study which came out in June looking at PCOS individuals who were both 2 sort of groups put on the combined pill, and the control group just on the combined pill, and the experimental group, the combined pill plus vitamin D and nutrient sort of intervention. Both saw improvements, but the one with nutrition and vitamin C saw a lot more improvements in markers like glucose, metabolism, BMI, all those things. It's about integrative medicine and bringing in all the things and what suits that individual. I have clients who are on the pill. I have clients who are on metformin and on GLP-1s, but you can still integrate amazing medication whilst doing your holistic approach at the same time. And I think there's this, I'm all natural, I'm only doing it this way. And actually there's so many options, and it's about picking the right thing for you. The thing is, with the pill, that's not going to get down to the root cause and solve the syndrome of what's driving it. It's a bit like a plaster, but it can just, when something's affecting someone's quality of life so much, it can just take the burden off. And then also they might want contraception at that time. So it's a win-win, but you've got to do the groundwork. What can be tricky is you're not going to get a true picture of what's going on. So the cycle or the symptoms. So are we on the right line with certain things?
I've known of cases, and I totally get it, of women where, particularly with endometriosis, they've been given the pill and it's masked the symptoms and they're happy and they go about their life. And then several years later, they want to try for a baby. And because they've been taking the pill, it's blunted their awareness that the endometriosis has been progressing and, has maybe affected their ovaries and fallopian tubes. And now they find themselves in a situation where their fertility is affected. And they're raging because nobody told them. And, had they not taken the pill, the symptoms would have given them, and it might have been that they'd have frozen their eggs when they were younger. Or they might have done things differently.
To seek help sooner. 100%.
They might have had surgery or other treatments. So I get it. So there are some people out there who absolutely have a right to be talking about it and raising awareness. And I think whilst there may be some influencers who have a very different opinion to me on some of these things, I think what's helpful and what I would say to people is, if you're seeing this and it's frightening you and you're thinking, I'm just going to stop taking the pill because of this, use that to form a question list. All those concerns, let them form the questions that you then take to the healthcare professional that you trust. And I know with GPs, people don't always have a great experience. But if you do have somebody that you trust, or, if you can see somebody privately, or, if things are really, really tricky, particularly if you do have a diagnosed condition or you suspect you have an undiagnosed condition, ask to be referred to a specialist.
And it's communication. So has that individual been told, well, take this and it will solve it? Because then you're under the impression, it's solving it, and then it's gone, and you're like, what's going on? So it's about understanding what's the mechanism. So what is that doing? And it's actually, it's mimicking a shutdown where those volume buttons might be down. And I'm talking about PCOS in that particular instance, and with endometriosis. So I got the double whammy, stage 4 endo and PCOS. And I didn't just do it through diet. I had to have surgery, and I talk about that, and anyone who says just come, it's the charlatans who may say just cut out red meat, we'll get rid of your endo and drink green tea. It doesn't work like that. If I didn't have, the invasive surgery I had to have, I doubt I would have my children. And so it's about bringing in all the amazing medical advances and then bringing it in with all the other things we know, and we know even more now than we did about the gut and nutrition, and particularly with fertility, the vaginal microbiome. So you don't get any medals for trying to do things all naturally. It's like birth, do what's right for you, It's
the same with HRT, isn't
it?
Yeah,
exactly the same.
I believe that lifestyle interventions for managing perimenopause and menopause are for everybody. It doesn't mean you don't take HRT. Some people, HRT will be right for them, some people it won't.
Yeah.
But whether you're taking HRT or not, the lifestyle changes you can make are really important.
Absolutely. And it's so personal, isn't it? I mean, none of us are exactly the same. We all have different lives, different bodies, different stuff going on with us. But as you say, there's no quick fix, there's no hack. It's about knowing what works for you. And
if only there was a magic wand.
I know, right? We could wave it. We wouldn't need to do this podcast.
There is a good book.
But yeah, it's about, real change takes time. And also, as we mentioned right at the beginning, you change throughout your life and your hormones change naturally, and you're not trying to stop that. So the things and systems you need to really sort of walk on eggshells as you get older, insulin sensitivity, bone density, all those things, it gets hard, we get dealt a pretty bad hand as women, and all those mechanisms that can drive hormonal dysfunction, they get impacted by the drop of sex hormones. So you've got to work even harder on those areas. Our risk factor for diabetes is so much greater than men, and
it's even like just maintaining. I've always been very strong, and I'm fighting right now to cling on to any muscle that I have.
Yeah, muscle mass, so important.
It gets harder. So whilst you're young and it's easy, make the most of it.
Make the most, and you don't have kiddies.
And take all of these fantastic tips as you age.
Yes.
Small changes, like doable things. It's it's great to be in this chair and to learn so much from you both on what we can actually do to support our hormones, and on tips as well. We're nearing the end of the podcast, but I always like to finish by asking my guests for their one wellness non-negotiable. So probably quite hard to pick just one for both of you, but what would be your one tip that you could give on, or your one thing that you love that keeps you well?
I mean, the one thing I love is lifting heavy weights in the gym. It just makes me feel like me. But I've had a back issue and I've been struggling. But I think my one non-negotiable, it comes back to that stress. I learned a very valuable lesson when I had an issue with my heart last year, and it's stress less. We've got so many epidemics going on. We've got an obesity epidemic, but I think the stress epidemic that we have, the way we live our lives now, and the way we're subjected to stress constantly is possibly the most important lifestyle risk factor. So stress less.
We are pretty strung out, aren't we, I think, as a society.
And I think young people, when we were talking about social interactions how we're actually less connected than ever before, for young people, that's multiplied, 10 times over. So that's my concern, is stress.
Yeah, that's a good tip. What about you, Hannah?
Do more fun things. And eat breakfast. I think eating breakfast, if I could have two, maybe put on some really amazing disco music and then just enjoy. But eating breakfast, I think, is a really, really important. It's a really simple start to a wellness journey of what you're having. But as a woman, we want to ensure, ideally within 90 minutes of waking up, you have something to eat.
It's a fantastic advice. And also on the disco music, I love that.
Yes, perfect. Always here for the disco.
Or drum and bass, whatever you vibe.
Yeah, whatever you're into, turn it on. Well, thank you so much to you both for joining me and for all the incredible tips. I've learned so much today. If you are interested in reading Hannah's book, Everything I Know About Hormones, it is available at all good bookshops and online. If you want to seek out Dr. Zoe, you can find her on your television screens from This Morning and Loose Doctors. You can also find her book online. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Well Enough. We will see you next time, and in the meantime, stay well.